The Vatican Apostolic Archives. Most people hear Vatican secret archives and imagine forbidden books and hidden relics. But the real story is way more interesting and more documented. Because the Vatican Apostolic Archives aren't a rumor. They are a working research institution with more than 12 centuries of records, and scholars walk into it every year. So today, let's separate the myths from what's actually inside. The reality is quieter. What the archives actually preserve is memory, not just triumphs, but doubts, not just authority, but hesitation, not just faith, but fear, silence, and human error. Within those shelves are records of excommunication and reconciliations, records of the trials like Galileo's, and political struggles like the fall of the Knights Templar. They contain letters written by artists and pleas written by ordinary believers, as well as diplomatic cables exchanged during the darkest moments of the 20th century. Some of these documents reveal courage, others reveal restraint, and sometimes silence. Act 2. What the archives actually are. The archives, formerly known as the Archivio Secreto Vaticano, are located inside the Vatican City. The entrance is through Porta Sant'Anna, near the Vatican Library, and the archives extend into an underground complex beneath the Apostolic Palace. Part of this system includes a secure bunker on the Cortile de la Viña. This is where the Holy See stores centuries of official documents, carefully preserved in climate-controlled vaults. The collections inside the archives cover around 12 centuries of history, from the 8th to the 20th century. In total, they include over 600 archival fonts, stored across more than 85 kilometers of shelving, which is around 50 miles, I believe. These range from royal correspondence and papal decisions to diplomatic records and state-level agreements. In 1881, Pope Leo XIII officially opened the archives to scholars, transforming them into one of the world's most important research centers for historical studies. Access follows a structure established in 1924. Each pope decides which pontificate is open to researchers. Currently, documents are accessible up to the end of the papacy of Pope Pius XII in 1958, which is the pope that was around the World War II. The archives primarily serve the Pope and the Holy See, but they also grant access to scholars of all nations and all faiths. Their mission has always been the same: to preserve the documentary history of the Catholic Church and make it available for serious academic research. How documents are stored. General storage. The archives preserve far more than bound volumes. The collection includes registers, bundles, folders, boxes, envelopes, and thousands of individual documents, each stored inside protected climate-controlled environments. Parchments and rare items. Documents like parchments are kept flat inside acid-free cases, stored in large sliding drawers within two specialized climate and humidity-controlled rooms. Some of the most valuable items are kept in separate air conditioning sectors. These treasures include the 81 parchments with gold seals, the original volume of the trial of Galileo Galilei, the Privilegium Ottonianum from the year 1962, written in gold script and purple parchment, and the Liber Diurnus Romanorum Pontificum, the oldest known formulary for the papal chancery, dating back to the 8th or 9th century. Many of the paper documents are stored inside the Vatican underground bunker and other dedicated rooms. The bunker, the underground vault. Plans for the underground storage vaults beneath the Cortile de la Viña were created during the papacy of Paul VI. The two-story bunker was officially inaugurated by John Paul II on October 18 of 1980. It's a reinforced fireproof concrete structure with the capacity of 31,000 cubic meters. Inside, more than 43,000 linear meters of shelving, both fixed and revolving, hold a large portion of the archive's paper materials. The bunker uses advanced systems to monitor security, temperature, humidity, and airflow. It's equipped with HVAC units, emergency lighting, and a paging system to safely manage the environment and protect the documents. Act 3: Access and Requirements. Research inside the archives is completely free of charge, but entry is limited to qualified scholars conducting scientific or historical studies. To apply, researchers must have a full university degree, the equivalent of a 5-year program. Members of the clergy need a licentiate degree or a PhD. Once approved, scholars can consult documents up to the end of the papacy of Pius XII, which closed in October 1958. Researchers and facilities. Every year, around 1,500 scholars from more than 60 nations make their way to the archives. To support that work, the Vatican provides 4 dedicated reading rooms, each equipped with power outlets for laptops and research tools. One room is dedicated to original documents. 2 others are designed for printed material and digital reproductions. And the fourth room is reserved for consultant inventories, catalogs, and other research guides. The key rooms. The first stop for every researcher is the Leon 13 Index Room. This is the gateway to the entire archive. Here, scholars access the indexes, catalogs, and the tools needed to locate documents. The room also houses the historic Schedario Grampi, the first room ever made available to scholars when Pope Leo XIII opened the archives in 1881. Next to the index room is the Pio XI document reading room, where researchers consult the materials they order from the distribution counter. The room overlooks the quiet Cortile de la Biblioteca, a peaceful courtyard with a small refreshment stand where scholars take breaks between sessions. A staircase from the index rooms leads to the sixth or fifth rooms. These rooms contain the essential reference materials researchers rely on, like dictionaries, encyclopedias, journals, monographs, and bibliographic tools covering historical, legal, and diplomatic subjects. They also include work areas where the Vatican staff can meet with scholars and hold research consultations. Act 4: Purpose and the Word Secret. From hidden to open. The archives actually date back to the 12th century, but access was extremely limited for hundreds of years. Only a handful of scholars could enter, and even they needed heavy approval. It wasn't until 1881, under Pope Leo XIII, that the archives were officially opened. But according to journalists, Pope Leo XIII didn't do this out of generosity. He did it under pressure. At the time, the newly unified Italian government needed documents to build its own national archive in Rome, but its own holdings were weak. Both Italy and Germany pushed the Vatican to open theirs. Pope Leo XIII faced a serious dilemma: open the archives voluntarily or risk having them absorbed into the Italian state archives. He opened them. From that moment on, any qualified scholar could request access, and the word secret remained only in its original sense: private, not hidden. Why they were called secret? Now, the word secret has caused a lot of confusion. People imagine hidden knowledge or censored text, but that wasn't the original meaning. The Latin word secretum means private, separate, or set apart. When Paul V founded the modern structures of the archives, he named them Apostolic Secret Archives, simply to say these documents are reserved for the Pope and his officials. Over time, the title stuck, even though the archives slowly became more and more accessible. Everything changed on October 22 of 2019, when Pope Francis officially removed the word secret, saying it created negative and misleading interpretations. The institution returned to its original name, the Vatican Apostolic Archives. Pope Francis also pointed out that the archives are not truly secret at all. Scholars have been using them for decades, and he personally ordered the early openings of the Pope Pius XII World War II archives, which became available on March 2nd of 2020. To access the archives today, researchers need a physical pass for Vatican City, picked up at Porta Santana with official ID. The two main missions. The Vatican Apostolic Archives operate with two core goals. The first is preservation, protecting one of the world's most significant collection of historical documents. The second is access, providing scholars the tools they need to study centuries of church activity. These two purposes were captured clearly by Pope Paul VI in 1973, when he said that cultivating the archives means preserving the history of the Transitus Domini, the passage of Christ through the world, and his words. Our sheets of paper are echoes and traces of the passage of the Lord Jesus in this world. To honor these papers, these documents, these archives, is to honor Christ, to preserve the sense of the church, and to hand down the story of his passage to future generations. There's nothing here, man. It's just, I can't even read with this, man. It's just a problem. Act number 5, documents that shape history. So, what exactly is inside the Vatican Apostolic Archives? Inside the archives, around 53 miles of shelving hold some of the most important documents in world history. Letters written by Michelangelo, the complete records of Galileo's trial, the excommunication document of Martin Luther, files related to the suppression of the Knights Templar, correspondence between popes and kings, diplomatic reports, papal bulls, and ancient manuscripts. Archivists refer to the building as the bunker, not because of secrecy, but because it's literally constructed as a fortress to protect the documents. Let's briefly go through some of these documents. Trials against the Knights Templar. The trial against the Knights Templars collection comprises transcriptions of testimony concerning accusations of heresy against French knights of the Christian military religion Order of the Poor Knights of Christ and the Temple of Solomon. The collection includes 4 large-scale parchment documents prepared at, or at the proceedings conducted at, Pioties and Chinon in 1308, and 24 loose paper leaves made in 1312 at the papal chancery at the order of the Pope Clement V. The documents provide unique insight into the events that led to the suppression of the order in 1312. Founded in 1118 to protect the pilgrims in the Holy Land, the Templars soon became a military order serving the King of Jerusalem. By the early 14th century, the order had become very wealthy, and probably hoping to see some of that wealth, Philip IV, King of France, had ugly rumors spread about the knights that lead to the arrest and inquiry into their activities. Struggle between the king and pope. The trial against the Templars was a part of a long diplomatic struggle between the French knight Philip IV the Fair and the papacy that began before Clement V's reign. Philip had all Knights of Templar in French territory arrested in 1307 and tried for heresy. Many confessed under torture of the threat of torture. The Pope then launched an inquiry into the whole affair. Many of the accused confessed, as I said before, under torture or the threat of it. The trials quickly became part of a larger political struggle between the French crown and the papacy. Although the accusations originated under royal pressure, Pope Clement V launched a formal inquiry into the matter. seeking to investigate the claims at a church level. The documents preserved in the Vatican Archives reveal the tension clearly, showing how religious authority, royal power, and financial interest collided. Ultimately, despite the lack of conclusive evidence of heresy, the Order of the Knights Templar was officially dissolved in 1312. Today, the archives preserve these records not as a legend or mystery, but as primary sources, allowing historians to reconstruct how one of the most powerful orders in medieval Europe came to an abrupt end. Testimony before the Pope. Unlike many medieval trials, the case against the Knights Templar was not handled solely by secular courts of the Inquisition. Pope Clement V insisted that the knights testify directly before him. Between June 29 and July 2 of 1308, 72 Templar knights appeared before the Pope and an assembly of cardinals at his temporary residence in Paris in central France. Their testimony was recorded in 3 large parchment documents, each drawn by an authority and then independently verified by another, an unusual step meant to ensure accuracy. These documents remain preserved in the Vatican Apostolic Archives and offer first-hand accounts from the accused themselves. The Shannon Testimony. While many knights testified in Poitiers, the highest-ranking leaders of the order were deliberately kept away. The Grand Master of the Templars, Jacques de Molay, along with other senior officials, was imprisoned at the royal castle of Chinon, a move designed by King Philip IV to exclude them from papal proceedings. The Pope responded by sending a commission of 3 cardinals to Chinon in August 1308, where the imprisoned leaders were formally questioned. The documents recording these depositions, now known as the Chinon Parchment, was long believed to be lost. It was rediscovered only in 2001, revealing that Pope Clement V had heard and accepted the knight's testimony. As with the Poitiers records, an already recorded the proceedings, and another verified their accuracy. The end of the Templar Order. Despite the testimony gathered, political pressure continued to mount. In 1312, at the Council of Vienna, Pope Clement V officially dissolved the Order of the Knights Templar. Their property was transferred to the Hospital of St. John of Jerusalem. Importantly, Clement did not condemn the order as guilty of heresy. Instead, he prohibited anyone from entering the order in the future, under threat of excommunication. 2 leaders, Jacques de Molay, the Grand Master, and the Grand Commander of Normandy, continued to protest their imprisonment. Both were ultimately condemned to death. Their execution marked the final chapter of one of the most powerful military religious orders in medieval history. The excommunication of Martin Luther. Among the many historically significant documents preserved in the Vatican Apostolic Archives is the official excommunication of Martin Luther, a text tied directly to one of the most transformative moments in Western history. On October 31st, 1517, Martin Luther published his 95 Theses. Contrary to how they often remembered, these theses were not originally written to overthrow the authority of the Roman Catholic Church. They were intended as an invitation to scholarly debate among the clergy. Just a month earlier, Luther had already circulated 97 theses criticizing scholastic theology, arguing that human reasoning alone could not fully reveal divine truth. His latter thesis focused specifically on the sale of indulgences, documents sold by the Church that promised to reduce time in purgatory. Luther denounced the practice as unbiblical and driven by greed. Initially, Both writings were meant for academic discussion and were written in Latin, but everything changed once the theses were translated into German and spread throughout the newly developed printing press. Within a year, the theses had circulated across Europe in multiple languages. To many readers, they appeared as a direct challenge to church authority, especially because Luther was a respected theologian and a monk in a good standing at the time. In Rome, Pope Leo X viewed Luther's teachings as heretical and repeatedly demanded that he recant. Luther refused. That refusal led to a decisive moment recording in Vatican history. On January 3rd of 1521, Pope Leo X issued a papal bull Decem Romanum Pontificem, formally excommunicating Martin Luther from the Catholic Church. The consequences were enormous. What began as a theological debate turned into the Protestant Reformation, permanently fracturing Western Christianity and leading to the formation of multiple Christian denominations. Today, the documents tied to Luther's excommunication remain preserved in the Vatican Apostolic Archives, not as relics of secrecy, but as records of a turning point that reshaped religion, politics, and European society itself. Michelangelo Buonarroti. While some of the documents in the archives records trials, condemnations, and institutional powers, others reveal something far more intimate. Beyond verdicts and decrees, the archives also preserve personal correspondence, letters never intended for the public, written by some of the most influential minds in history. Among them are letters from Michelangelo. These handwritten documents offer a rare glimpse into the private thoughts of the artist behind the Sistine Chapel. In his letters, Michelangelo writes not as a legend, but as a man frustrated with Patreons, exhausted by commissions, struggling financially, and deeply aware of the physical toll his work took on his body. Preserved alongside papal bulls and Inquisition records, these letters remind us that the Vatican archives are not only a record of doctrine and discipline, but also a repository of human voices frozen in time. In ink, on paper, written centuries ago, history speaks quietly from the shelves. Among the most consequential documents preserved in the archives are those relating to the 1633 trial of Galileo Galilei. Galileo was brought before the Roman Inquisition after defending the heliocentric model, the idea that the Earth revolves around the Sun, a position that directly contradicted the Church's officially accepted geocentric worldview, which placed the Earth as the center of the universe and was believed to align with the Scripture. During the trial, Galileo was declared vehemently suspect of heresy. He was forced to formally abjure, cursed, and detest his heliocentric views under oath. As punishment, Galileo was sentenced to house arrest for life. His most famous work, Dialogue Concerning the Two Chief World Systems, was placed on the Index of Prohibited Books, and he was forbidden from publishing any future works. The trial records preserved within the Vatican archives provide a rare look into the intersection of faith, authority, and scientific inquiry, and remain one of the most cited examples of institutional conflict with emerging scientific thought. The archives taken to Paris. The Vatican Apostolic Archives haven't always remained safely inside the Vatican City. In fact, one of the most dramatic chapters in their history happened far from Rome. Throughout the centuries, many powers have tried to get their hands on the church documents. During the sack of Rome in 1527, the troops of Emperor Charles V, the fierce Landsknechts, stormed the city. They forced their way into the archives, but surprisingly, didn't destroy anything. What they did leave behind were their signatures, actual graffiti still visible in the walls today, and a reminder that even invaders felt the weight of the history around them. But the worst blow to the archives came later, under Napoleon. After invading Rome, Napoleon's men, helped by a traitor inside the archives, managed to seize an enormous quantity of documents. Card after card left the Vatican carrying centuries of papal history, all the way to Paris, to the Hotel des Suisses. Napoleon even envisioned a future where Pius XII would be brought to France and the papacy itself would be centered in Paris. And the archives, of course, would be there with him. When Napoleon fell, the Vatican wanted its history back. The return of the documents began in 1815, but according to Archbishop Pagano, it was not easy. The French tried to hold onto everything they could. Still, the Vatican had a powerful ally, the sculptor Antonio Canova, known for his masterpieces in marble. He also became a relentless negotiator, fighting to reclaim the church heritage. Many documents made it home, but some didn't. A famous example is the 1809 papal bull that excommunicated Napoleon. It should be in Rome, but instead it now sits in the state archives of Vienna, Austria. A perfect irony. Napoleon tried to bring the papacy to France, and in the end, a document condemning him ended up in neither country. Act number 6. Pius XII and conflicted interpretations. While the name Secret Archives is no longer used, the archives still hold materials that remain reserved due to age restrictions, preservation issues, or confidentiality rules. This was discussed openly in the 2024 book Secretum, written by journalist Massimo Franco and Archbishop Sergio Pagano, the prefect of the archives. Pagano has worked there since 1978 and has served the prefect since 1997. In the book, he reflects on what he calls the paper purgatory of the Vatican archives, a vast landscape of documents waiting to be restored, cataloged, and eventually studied. And one of the most important and controversial collections inside is the archive of Pope Pius XII, the Pope who led the Catholic Church during the World War II. The Pius XII Files opening of the World War II era. In 2020, Pope Francis made a groundbreaking decision. He ordered the early opening of all documents from the Pontificate Pius XII, years ahead of schedule, to finally allow researchers to understand what really happened inside the Vatican during the Holocaust. Almost immediately, scholars from all around the world rushed to Rome. For decades, critics argued that Pius XII had not spoken out strongly enough against the Nazi extermination of the Jewish people. The Vatican had always defended him, saying he worked behind the scenes and practiced quiet diplomacy to save lives. Fearing that the public condemnation would provoke violent retaliation even against the Vatican itself, Archbishop Sergio Pagano, the longtime prefect of the archives, isn't afraid to speak honestly. He says that while he understands Pius' silence during the war, he struggles to understand his silence after it ended. Pagano put it plainly. During the war, the Pope made a choice. He could not and would not speak. After the war, I would have expected a word more for all the people who went to the gas chambers. According to him, Pius XII remained quiet even after 1945 because he was concerned about the political implications of a new Jewish state. The Vatican had long supported the Palestinian population and feared that openly condemning Nazi crimes after the war might be interpreted as political support for the creation of Israel, a highly sensitive issue at the time, especially regarding Christian holy sites in the region. So, in the archives, you don't just find ancient parchments, medieval bulls, or Renaissance letters. You also find the raw, unfiltered documents of some of the hardest moments in modern history, moments that still spark debate today. Another perspective on Pius XII. As scholars continue to examine the newly opened archives, not all conclusions point to the same directions. One of the most detailed alternative perspectives comes from the historian David Kurtzer. In his book, The Pope at War, Kurtzer draws from millions of recently released Vatican documents, along with the state archives from Italy, France, Germany, Britain, and the United States, to reconstruct World War II through the lens of Pope Pius XII, papacy, and the Vatican's vast diplomatic network. Among the documents he highlights are records of forensic searches for baptismal certificates, list of Jewish converts shared with the German ambassador, and desperate letters of Catholics begging the Pope to help locate relatives of Jewish descent. Kurtzer research paints a picture of a Pope who was not motivated by anti-Semitism, but by fear, and a deep belief that Vatican neutrality was the only way to protect the Catholic Church during the war. According to Kurtzer, Pius XII feared two possible outcomes. If the Axis powers won, he feared brutal retaliations against Catholics in German occupied territories. If they lost, he feared the spread of atheist communism across Christian Europe. To avoid either scenario, Kurtzer argues Pius adopted an extremely cautious strategy, one designed to avoid confrontation with Nazi Germany at almost any cost. This caution extended even to the Vatican-owned newspaper, the Osservatore Romano, which reportedly received direct instructions not to report on German atrocities, while maintaining cooperation with Benito Mussolini's fascist regime. The consequences of that silence were most visible on October 16, 1943, when Jews were rounded up in Rome, just steps away from the Vatican, and deported to Auschwitz. Even then, Pius XII made no public statement explicitly condemning the SS massacres. In the end, Kurtzer reaches a nuanced conclusion. Pius XII, he argues, was not the Hitler's Pope, rejecting the more extreme accusations made by earlier critics. But neither was he the heroic defender of the Jews, like some of his supporters continue to claim. Instead, the archives reveal a leader trapped by fear, diplomacy, and a belief that silence was the lesser of two evils. A judgment that historians are still debating today. Okay. Act 7. The Real Secrets. For all that talk about secrecy, the archives, in fact, are open to qualified scholars. But according to the Archbishop Sergio Pagano, there are some limits. Deep inside the bunker, there exists a very small collection of documents that no researcher is allowed to consult. Not historians, not journalists, and not even most of the church officials. These are documents tied directly to the inner governance of the church. First and foremost are the records of the papal conclaves. While the physical ballots are burned after each election, summaries of the votes remain. Records that show how the support shifted round by round inside the Sistine Chapel. These summaries are preserved, were permanently sealed. Also restricted are private documents belonging to the popes and cardinals, including sensitive correspondence and internal evaluation. Reports concerning episcopal elections, decisions about the Holy See personnel, and internal disciplinary matters are likewise excluded from the public access. Finally, secrecy extends to marriage records. Fuck, man, these words, I don't know how to pronounce them. I know it. I know I can say it, but marriage. Come on, man, marriage? Okay. Finally, secrecy extends to marriage records, and select documents held by the Secretary of State that are deemed too sensitive to release. These are not hidden to conceal conspiracies, but to protect the privacy, the governance, and the internal functioning of an institution that has existed for nearly 2,000 years. In other words, the Vatican archives are not secret in a way the popular culture imagines, but at their very core, some silence is still intentional. Ay, Act 7, dude. Act 8. What's not in the archives? For every real document preserved inside the Vatican Apostolic Archives, there are dozens of legends about what people believe is hidden there. In his book Secretum, Archbishop Sergio Pagano directly addresses many of these claims and dismisses them one by one. One of the most persistent rumors is that Nazi gold is hidden somewhere in the Vatican basement. According to Pagano, this claim has no historical basis whatsoever. Another recurring story claims that the Vatican possessed the menorah, the seventh branch candelabrum from the First Temple of Jerusalem, allegedly stolen by Emperor Vespasian and later recovered by the popes. The archives, Pagano says, do not possess it. And, addressing some of the most extreme claims directly, Pagano said that there are no shelves holding the skulls of extraterrestrials. Which is, man, come on. So I wanted to know, what are the ovnis, man? On a more serious note, the Archbishop was equally firm in stating that there is not a line in the Vatican archives concerning the disappearance of Emanuela Orlandi, the daughter of a Vatican employee who vanished mysteriously in 1983. So, where do these legends come from? Much of the blame lies with fiction. For centuries, novels and plays set in or around the Vatican archives have blurred the line between historical fact and invention. Works like Ralph Huhut's The Deputy of Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code achieved massive popularity. By doing so, they also cemented false ideas in the public imagination. The result is a paradox. The Vatican archives are vast, real, and historically powerful, but the myths surrounding them have often proven far more influential than the truth. Act 9, the Chronovisor. And yet, despite all of the clarifications, one legend still continues to surface. A device said to look not into the secret documents, but into the past itself. During the research for this video, one modern legend surfaced repeatedly, the Chronovisor. The Chronovisor is the name given to an alleged time-viewing device, attributed to Italian Benedictine monk and scientist Pellegrino Ernetti, who claimed it could observe past events by detecting residual sound and light waves. The story is most widely known through the book Father Ernetti's Chronovisor, the creation and disappearance of the world's first time machine. However, it is important to note that no physical evidence of such device has ever been produced, and its existence remains unverified and highly disputed. For that reason, the Chronovisor belongs not to the documented history of the Vatican archives, but to the modern mythology that often surrounds them. And it's precisely this mixture of history and imagination that continues to shape how the archives are perceived today. But hey, maybe I'll make a video in the future about it. Who knows? In the end, the most important thing hidden in the archives isn't a secret at all. It's just history waiting to be read. That's all, folks.